Yes, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new setup, new webinar, where we're going to meet the experts. And I have one here, Alvaro. I'll wait 1 minute actually or maybe 30 seconds to let some people come in. I see many are now coming in as we're right on the top of the hour. But yeah, it's a new concept. So we're doing this interview style. I am gonna ask a lot of questions about too long file paths and invalid characters, and I hope everyone will learn a lot about that. Just some people getting in still. Pick it off again. Okay, I think we're set. Okay, welcome everyone. New setup, meet the experts. The expert here, Alvaro. I'll give a little bit of an introduction about the concept. So we're going to do this monthly. We're not going to do any presentations about who we are as Xillio, what our value propositions is. We're going to talk about specific issues that our migration consultants encounter during their day-to-day work, basically. This time, we're going to talk about too long file paths in SharePoint. It's one of the issues we encounter almost every migration, I think, and invalid characters, which is probably the same. So a little bit about me. I'm Sjoerd Alkema. I'm the commercial director with Xillio. Background in enterprise content management. Been in that area for 20 years now. 9 years already with Xillio. Have been in different roles and now commercial responsible. We do mostly still what we started with 20 years ago is content migrations. So that's what we love to talk about, and that's what we're going to talk about. And I'll let Alvaro, our expert today, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sjoerd, for having me, and thank you everybody for attending the call. Look forward to this. Hope it's useful. In particular, my background is in law, actually. So I was a lawyer for 4 years in energy contracts. I've now been migrating data for the last year and a half. Been on multiple projects, most of them to SharePoint Online. So I am quite familiar now with the problems we're going to discuss. Again, highlighting long URLs and too long URLs and the invalid characters. So if anybody has any questions specifically about those, we look forward to delving into them.
Yeah, good that you say that, because questions are very welcome, and they're also, I'll try to moderate. So if you have one during the session, and we'll keep it short, really 30 minutes. If you have one, just put it in the chat, and we'll try to get into the question right away. But now, so the topic at hand, let's start with too long file paths.
Yeah.
What is it? Can you explain?
Absolutely. So SharePoint Online and your content on SharePoint Online will be found with the tenant URL that is, in our case, xillio.sharepoint.com. And based on which folder and which file you're in, the URL will be built out of the names of all of the folders that file is found in. And SharePoint has a character limit of 400 characters. So oftentimes when we have clients migrating from a different system, for example, Documentum or Alfresco, and they're migrating to SharePoint, they need to be very careful about how deep their files go, because if you've got a file 23 folders in on one content management system, it might cause a problem for you when you're trying to migrate to SharePoint. So that is the brief outline of the character limits.
Yeah, we're going to talk about invalid characters as well.
That's right.
What's invalid?
Yeah, so an invalid character could be a question mark. It could be a slash on a folder name. There are certain rules, right? There's also some extensions that are invalid. So really what we're highlighting are some requirements that SharePoint sites need to adhere to, right? So all of the files and folders will have certain rules that apply to them, and they might not be the same set of rules that you have in your previous system. And so when you're migrating content from one system to another, you need to make sure that these rules would be adhered to when you migrate over. So that's some of the most common problems that we actually see, these too long URLs and these invalid characters.
Yeah, and we see that everywhere actually. But what I never understood, and maybe I'm gonna do with this. So I understand. I mean, you have a URL that's that's a certain concept, so you can't have any character. But the path length, why is there a maximum actually?
Yeah, why is a good question. It's particularly related to two things, I guess. It's really performance and security. So SharePoint will index a lot of the pages, make sure that it loads a lot faster. And if the URLs start exceeding, an unlimited amount of size, this might cause problems, I guess, on the storage side, right? So that might make some sense. As well with security, URLs often contain a lot of deep information, and a lot of malicious actors can actually slide certain commands in the URL. So I presume that the 400 character limit relates as well to that.
Okay, makes sense. Interesting. That's something I learned today. So everyone in the call, please, if you would like to share in the chat what your potential challenge with too long file paths or invalid characters is, that would be greatly appreciated, because we can then potentially go into those specifics into when we're going to show how we analyze this topic and how we also deal with it. So maybe the system you're about to migrate from, or why is the worry there? Please share. You can also just share where you're dialing in from. That's also fun to know. We're here in rainy Hilversum. It's actually still raining. It's been all day, but still beautiful here. Feel free already. So that's good. Best practices for file naming in SharePoint to handle the character limit. We'll get to that, I'm sure. So we'll take that question as part of our explaining of the solution. But now let's first go into while people put in their locations. We have Calgary here. Welcome. When we're at a customer, we want to have as soon as possible, probably, because you want to know if it's a potential risk and how then to deal with it. So can you share how we investigate this? And
absolutely,
how we know.
So constant, commonly attributed to the ETL process, the extraction, transformation, loading process, right? And in between, Xillio, of course, gets involved with the analysis. So I'm just going to share my screen for a moment, and I hope everybody can see. Let me share over here. What we like to do essentially is, extract, the client's data and make sure that we accomplish two things. We want a client always to really understand the full picture of what we see from their data, as well as identify the problems that we might have when we're going to migrate over. And that covers, again, the full URLs as well as the invalid characters. So this is some mock data right now, but quite representative of a client. It's highlighting how big the storage size is of everything we've extracted. This is actually a documentum extraction, so that's why you see a cabinet count. If this was Alfresco, you might see a site count instead. And we'll tailor all of our dashboards really specifically to a client's needs. Here you're getting a department breakdown as well as the activity of the content. So when was it last modified? And this is really at the beginning, just to try and get a good picture of what the client is or what they have in their system. We also get some useful stuff like count and size of duplicates. This obviously helps save on cost, because you might identify you've got hundreds of gigs in storage for duplicates that you don't really need twice, and that's often very useful for clients to know. But this lower part actually highlights the problems that we're talking about in this call, right? So we're talking about invalid characters, and we're talking about URLs that are too long. So in this sample data, we can actually see over here, we've got 15.14% of our URLs are exceeding the 400 character limit. So this would cause a problem for us.
Anyway, right? Yeah. So you need to deal with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. This would cause a problem with us when we try to migrate to SharePoint. So we would then be, building out reports after these dashboards to this particular, a name trim or a different naming convention applied to it in order for us to migrate it without an issue. And it's the same as with the invalid characters. So here you're talking about a total count, nearly 29,000, and then a whole bunch of invalid characters. So the asterisk, the pipe, little squiggly sign, you've got a whole bunch of stuff. And so our extraction gets all of the data, all of the names, a lot of the metadata, and then what we're doing is making these dashboards to better understand what we're going to encounter and what needs to be transformed in order for us to migrate the content over after to SharePoint.
Right, and one of these portions of this diagram is I see 350 till
Yeah.
400, so that's not really a problem.
That's right.
But something to be aware about, or why is this is typically something that might cause a problem?
Yeah, definitely. I think well, it's important for the client to understand, not only what is going to cause a problem immediately when you migrate, but if, for example, you've got a folder and a file in a URL that's already reaching 380 characters, if you're going to build out a new folder there and start putting in more and more files or more and more layers of depth, i.e. more folders inside, you're going to very quickly exceed that 400 character limit. So it's about making the client aware that, look, this is already what needs to be transformed in order to be migrated over, but also be well aware that you might encounter some issues in the future if we don't apply new naming conventions or a strict limit on how many characters folders should have, for example.
Right. Makes sense. And I see this actually also is for the file name, right? The maximum length.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know. So second thing I learned today.
Yeah. But so exactly. So file names as well have a max limit on SharePoint Online. It should be 256 characters. So you don't want file names exceeding that many characters. It's also kind of bad practice. I think the question was about, naming convention.
Yep.
I mean, really, if you've got a file with exceeding 200 characters in its name, that's the vast majority of the URL. So you could already be quite low in the layers of depth in a SharePoint site, and already you might be encountering this 400 URL limit. It is problematic, and that's also why we highlight the name length.
Yeah, I think also what is a best practice from a SharePoint implementation context is that you work with metadata, of course. So a long file name probably holds multiple information components, like this is a contract or customer this, and this is a concept, and blah blah blah. So those things you can capture in metadata, right? So the actual file name is just what the file is, or maybe you don't even need that much, right? Because you describe it all in metadata. So I think, especially coming from file shares, that's what we see as a best practice, and actually also solving the file path, because especially with the file share, but we see it also in ECM systems. I think the file path is used kind of as metadata, so it holds a lot of information. This is department X. Yeah. This is for finance. This is contracts. So if you transform that into metadata, then the file path also is less long. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the thing is, every client's different. Everybody's got, their own naming conventions or their own standards, or exactly a specific site, maybe for a department. It all really depends on the scale and maybe the nature of the business, right? Yeah. Do they have to have their data, split up for compliance reasons? It really varies. So all of the dashboards would be, built out really customized for particular needs.
Yeah. So a question on this, and I think there are other questions, but this is specifically on this. So when the reports are created during a migration, are there ways to capture necessary metadata?
Yeah, absolutely. On our report side, so exactly what you were saying, Sjoerd. So in particular, if we've got a whole bunch of files with their metadata, and we've got their name, and it is, like you said, a very long name. Let's imagine it's 200 characters. If you do have metadata stored in your previous system, let's assume that this is Alfresco, already captured that Alfresco has, we would be able to grab all that information, build it out in the report, and then actually map it for your SharePoint migration. So then on the SharePoint side, you could have the shorter name, then maybe we trim off the metadata that we're going to put on the columns for SharePoint Online. Yeah. And absolutely, our reporting would include the metadata and whatever else we can find from the extraction. So any of the information you see here, you would obviously be able to get on the reports as well.
Yeah. And use it, right? So any data point is basically you can use to do any business logic or any rule. So there are two questions about characters specifically. So one is, I don't know if you know it. So the German umlaut, are they counted as 1 or 2 characters?
I actually don't know. That's a great question.
Find that out. It's a good question.
I don't know if it's 1 or 2. And I'd imagine it's 1.
I imagine it's 1 too. And the space, is that 1 character?
The space doesn't take up a character in your SharePoint URL. Okay. So if you have a folder name and the space, it won't. The URL would actually be encoded, I think, to be a %20 in the actual URL, but that won't actually count to your URL limits. So it might actually be worth pointing out where the count starts. So let's assume that the SharePoint site is ours, so it's xillio.sharepoint.com. It's right after there, a /sites/, and from that very first /sites, that's where you get the count going. Okay. And any folder names, again, with the spacing, the space will not count for your character limit. So you're good to go with some spaces in the folder names.
Okay. There's another question I want to go into quickly. So are there ways to continue to see the dashboard after migration? There are, and actually this is worth a whole separate session probably, but we've recently launched a product, we call it Content Care, because when we do a migration, we tap into all the information with this dashboard product. It's called Insights. And after the migration, you got it all cleaned up. You want to make sure it stays like that, right? The quality you want to keep on top of that, but also the adoption. You might want to check how is it used really, but also on the security and compliance side, you want to know, are there any risks, and how is it being used, and are we creating risks maybe by using it? Are we sharing too much with others? So that's the dashboard, and it's actually an extension of this dashboard. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting question, and so that's there. So you can stay, or you can keep it around, and make sure you stay in control of your SharePoint environment.
Absolutely.
But that's a different topic. So back to the topic at hand. Right. This is how we analyze if there are any issues. We talked a little bit about fixes, but maybe to start with the too long file paths. What are typical ways to fix this for our customers? We talked about transferring it to metadata. I think that's one, but are there any other ways that we use a lot? Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the point I want to stress is different might be super important. Maybe they're looking to apply new naming conventions as well. So often we also have clients that, okay, they've got these folder names at the moment, but really they're not interested in keeping those names and they're going to apply something else. So really it's specific to the clients. Usually what we end up doing is gathering the first X amount of characters. So if we know that they've got 22 layers of depth, this might be where we start to get around files exceeding this 400 character limit. And so in those cases, we will want to be trimming down some folder names that exceed certain characters. So the way we could do is a strict rule on folders, exceeding 100 characters, we trim down to the first 30 and then maybe put their ID so that they're always, easily identifiable. But this could also be a specific thing. So based on the insights here, we might make some reports and highlight which folders names are too long. But if, for example, you've got a folder near the very roots of your site and it's got, more than 300 characters because it's a very specific folder name, you would only really need to trim that one folder name to solve a lot of your problems. So it is case by case, but we're always open to customize the solution to any needs, really.
And I think we've also many times set this up in a way that we do this per department, right? Or per business unit. So they have their share of their data to see if they have this issue, and if they have it, how they want to solve it. So we can even split that up per department.
Yeah, so on this dashboard, I mean, you can see if we, delved into marketing, we've got a different count over here. We've got the different size. We're also talking about now how many duplicates were found specifically for them only, as well as the counts on the, you see that it's fallen drastically. So yeah, it all depends, and we can always build out different rules for the naming conventions for different departments. So in some cases, you might need some stricter rules than others. But yeah, it's really case by case, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. So next, the solution. So let's first do a question, and then we'll go into the solution for invalid characters, probably.
Sure.
We're going to show something as well.
Sure.
I don't know this, but can Microsoft 365 ignore domain names as part of a migration path? I also don't exactly understand it, maybe.
So domain names, as far as I understand, we're talking about, I think Microsoft refers to them as tenant names. Yeah. If what you're talking about is the name before the .sharepoint.com, so if it was an HTTPS, // Xillio, our company, .sharepoint.com, that is all ignored. So if this is what you mean by the domain name, that is entirely ignored. And then afterwards, the /site/, that's where your count starts. So your tenant name is that specific to the company URL, that will not be counted. So it will be ignored in the 400 characters. That's right.
Right. And there's a question about privacy and security. How is that maintained during migration? And can URLs be used to enable additional security? The first part I know. I mean, we everything we transfer is encrypted, and we use HTTPS. Everything we store is also security and encrypted, stored in the tenant of the customer or on the premise of the customer, right? So a big thing when we do migrations, it's not going to our cloud or anything, but it's always in the customer's environment. But I don't know, can URLs be used to enable additional security? Do you know how that's meant?
To be frank, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not too sure how the URL.
Okay, maybe Ruth can elaborate, or otherwise we can pick it up separately. Then there was one other question. Are there methods for archiving files during migration, and how can these concepts be best communicated to staff? So there are, and we do that all the time. And actually, it's the other way around. So we let the staff or the users, we make them part of that discussion, right? And of course, there are policies in place probably. So from a records management perspective, where you say everything older than 7 years that can be moved into an archive, or any rule. So we can implement that rule as part of the migration process, but we do that together with the staff. So it's more communicating with them up front that we're going to do it that way, using also these insights reports. So basically, we implement the rule here, and you see what the impact is. So that's also the way how we communicate those concepts to the staff, using the actual interface of the data and applying the rules as we go. Basically, it's a very, very strong way, I think, of communicating.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about anything related to archiving, it touches upon compliance, and when you're talking about compliance, it's very jurisdiction specific as well sometimes, right? So a lot of our customers, they're in Europe, but a lot of them are in North America. Compliance rules differ quite substantially, and so our dashboards will always be customized to kind of whatever rules you're looking at in particular. We can mark things to be migrated to the SharePoint site, or things to be migrated to an archiving solution, whether that's our archiving solution or whether it's something else you already have in mind. The migration can be some content to the live sites where everything should be working on the day-to-day, and to a cold storage solution that can be accessed when required for legal reasons or anything like this.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I think we covered all the questions till now. So 7 minutes left. Let's quickly look into the actual migration product, I think, right? Where we're gonna look into a fix for invalid characters. And I think that's probably the more easier one, opposed to the long file paths, but you still have to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the long file paths is definitely more complex, and it's more case by case. Here, it's a bit simpler, and honestly, it's made simpler because of the software I use, right? So this is Xillio. This is a flow. This flow is a drag and drop low code kind of a tool that essentially comes with the product itself. It's an accelerator. Here, essentially, what we're doing is setting out what our invalid characters are. These are some of the characters you'd seen on the Insights dashboard from before. I connect it to the Mongo database, which is what we use. And here I'm applying a rule where all of the invalid characters will be replaced by an underscore. And I then select and put them in this array what the invalid characters are. So here you've also got some curly braces, something that wasn't an invalid character is highlighted in the other one. And this is then a solution for it, because once you actually set up the database and you specify which characters you want replaced, you'd really just let this run. And what you're doing is something quite straightforward, which is obviously finding in the name all of those characters, replacing them with that underscore. But you have to be quite careful, because if you've got two files in the same path at the moment, right? So let's imagine you've got a folder called documents, and you've got two files, and they're both called Sjoerd, and one's got a curly brace afterwards, and one's got a question mark. If you've now replaced those two characters with the same underscore, they now have the same name. Right. So the second part of this flow is actually making an aggregation that goes and sorts everything by the path that it's found in. And then if it has the same name, it will then actually add a counter. So this is how we avoid any same name file duplicates, because otherwise you would have trouble uploading it on, on the SharePoint side.
And maybe it's good to explain. So our migration database, our unified content store, as we call it. So it sits in the middle of any migration. So, but it has a source component and a target component. So, and the source component would have the invalid characters, right? In the name.
Correct.
And the replace will happen in the target component. So you can always. It's not that we change anything in the original name or anything. It's
absolutely.
So we can also track back what happened. So that's just something I wanted to share.
It's also common in our reports that we would have the original name, the name that it's been transformed. If you need specific reports where it's only highlighting those names that have been transformed, we could always account for this. Yeah, absolutely.
And so is that also part of the, it's part of the transformation reporting, right? This happened. And it's a list of files, and this is what happened.
Absolutely. It should always be clear, essentially, what you've extracted, never really touching that, and then making a replication and transforming that to then migrate over to SharePoint.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Another question. So do spaces become an issue for uploading to Microsoft 365?
Depends where it is. So if it's at the beginning of a file name or a folder name, it can cause a problem. There's a whole bunch of different characters as well. A folder can't end with a dot as well. There's a whole bunch of different rules. So all of our transformations and really just our experience in migrating the content, we're well aware. And this is the stuff we'll highlight in the dashboards themselves. Spaces can cause issues.
And this is also something that after migration and you start working with SharePoint, that you have to be, it's part of training probably, and just to be aware of best practices there, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, with 3 minutes to go, I think we covered it all, right? Or
I think so. Unless anybody has any other questions, I appreciate the engagement. So everybody that has written a question, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Any long file paths or invalid characters, who to go to, that's for sure. To Alvaro, thank you for that. With that, let's wrap up this first Meet the Experts webinar. I thought it was fun. It's a fun setting, not just both behind a laptop with our headset on, but actually in some kind of a studio in our beautiful office. One more question coming in.
Sure.
The framework comes with your solution? Yes,
that's right.
That's correct.
This amongst other solutions
and
as
so
well.
much more.
Yeah.
So that's that. Okay. I'm going to do this in a monthly rhythm. Keep them short. Keep them really informational. No boring sales presentations. So next up is next month. Who's going to be in?
I think it's Werner.
Werner is going to be in. Werner is, so I'll try to keep it in 30 minutes because it's Werner. And we're going to talk about Delta migrations, which is always a very interesting topic. I mean, you want to disrupt the business as little as possible. So you want to run deltas, but there are very, very many implications, or a lot of implications to that. So
100%.
I'm already looking forward to learning a lot from Werner about that. But with that, let's wrap it up. Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
Yes, man.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Questions.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.